This is Mind Your Own Business with Mike and Matt, Race Car Radio's podcast for business owners, entrepreneurs, and aspiring entrepreneurs. I'm David Hoffman, and your voices of reason are Mike Gansel and Matt Plosiak. On today's episode, how do you know when it's time to grow? So today we have Julie Van Such of J. Van Such Studio. They design and manufacture and sell printed scarves and accessories. And like a lot of solo entrepreneurs, since you started this company, it seems like you've had difficulty kind of knowing where to throw your energy at any given time, being yourself. There's all of these, and I certainly relate to this. There's all of these different aspects. You have to be looking at sales. You have to be looking at manufacturing. You have to be looking at operations. You have to be doing the bookkeeping. You have to be keeping all of these plates spinning, and sort of knowing where to be putting your focus at any one time is sometimes a bit of a struggle. So you were asking about, you're getting to the point where your company has grown to the point where maybe you're ready to not be a solo, a one-woman show, and actually be hiring a staff. Maybe talk about that. What are the questions and issues you're having sort of making that happen?
As a solo entrepreneur, how do you focus your energy? And in the beginning, what would you say is the best thing to focus on?
So, I think it depends, obviously what stage you're at. So when you're first starting, right, you need two things. You need a product or service to sell, and you have to have a customer. So it's somewhat chicken and egg, I guess, but you need something to sell first. So I'm guessing when you first started, you were designing.
Yep.
And so once you had some designs, then what did you do?
When I first started out, I was doing trunk shows at Henry Bendel. So I had a friend who was working there. He was a stylist, and he calls me up. He borrowed some of my scarves, and he's like, "Julie, I showed your scarves to the buyer. They want to do an event. Do you think you could have a bunch ready in 1 month?" And I was just like, yes. I had no idea how I was really going to pull all of that off, but I did. So I had already a market, and there was a clientele there, and I knew I had a buyer interested, and I had a place to sell. I had an event. I had a deadline, so to speak. So my first event, I feel like I just kind of winged it. And, I was really lucky because I, after doing a few of those initial trunk shows, I ended up meeting more buyers and getting more wholesale orders, and things sort of snowballed from there. But the very first event, I kind of just winged it.
So first you had a product.
Yes.
And a friend of yours started selling it, and then you had customers.
Yeah.
It was sort of...
Well, that isn't necessarily a business. That's actually, and that's actually the point that we always make, Matt, is that Julie is a perfect example of the accidental business owner, right?
Correct.
She had some components that basically said, okay, I'm ready. Mm-hmm. But Julie, were you really ready?
No, but I did what I needed to do, and I think I learned a lot from that initial experience, and then as I did more, I was more and more prepared. It's been a big challenge of mine to figure out what is the best thing to outsource, what's the best, what would free up my time in the best way that I could then have other headspace to focus on other responsibilities and other tasks. So is it marketing? Is it hiring somebody to do full-time shipping and handle e-commerce? Is it hiring a full-time salesperson? Do I hire a salesperson that works on commission? Or do I just hire a general assistant to help me in everything? So it's been an interesting challenge of knowing what to focus on and what exactly to look for in a new hire.
So, here's a question I have for you. Do you have a job description?
I have multiple.
That's exactly my point. So if you have a job description, which is multiple jobs, one of the things I would suggest is you actually write all of those multiple jobs down. Then you can begin to see, okay, you basically make two columns. We call that pay time, and we call that non-pay time. So when you look at all those jobs that you're doing, and let's say you decide what's pay time, and then you see what's non-pay time. Now you begin to see really where is the gap and where's the crack. So now, for instance, if it is indeed shipping and getting everything together, Well, that's actually, if you'd started to do that, that would be non-pay time. So maybe that's where you should focus. On the other hand,
what does that mean, Mike? Pay time. What do you mean by that?
well, pay time or non-pay time is, are you directly generating revenue? So pay time equals directly generating revenue. Non-pay time is indirectly generating revenue. So somebody who does shipping or operations is indirect. It does generate revenue, but it's indirect. Somebody who does sales is direct.
Yeah, or
Somebody
like
who does
marketing.
marketing, well, marketing could be a combination because you're never sure on marketing whether it does actually lead to sales. So if you start with that job description, get all of that down, and then divide it by pay time, generating revenue directly, and then not, and then you can begin to decide what is you actually need, the type of person for hiring. Does that make sense?
That's a good point. Yeah, how would you know? It sounds like a good exercise I should do.
So Julie, one of the points we make to our clients is that if the owner is actually doing the activity, you're maybe generating revenue, but you're really doing it to pay expenses with maybe a little bit left over. But if you hire someone, whether they're an employee or a contractor, and they can do it, you're making money on them.
Well, yeah, I mean, with that pay time, non-pay time divide, are you suggesting that she outsource the pay time or outsource the not pay time? What do you do with that?
Okay, well, now you take it one step further, which is a great question, which is, well, start off looking at what are your total revenues to date? What's your gross margin? Because it's really the bottom line, right? Add that, and then see if indeed, where are you going to get the most benefit? Is it going to be top line revenue or is it going to be bottom line? If it's top line revenue, I think Matt would be the first person to tell you, that's not the whole story. The question is, what does it do to your gross margin, and can you do better there? In other words, can you put more money into your pocket? Can you put more money into the company after all of your direct expenses go away?
Let me ask you a question, Julie. Are there things about what you do that you particularly enjoy and things you particularly don't enjoy? And is that maybe part of this equation?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that I learned, which I think it's funny, is when I first started this company, I don't think I ever thought of myself as a salesperson. It's been such a challenge to put myself out there and learn and talk to people. And so in the beginning, I used to hire people. I used to hire my sister, and she'd come help me with sales. But I realized that no one's ever going to be as good of a salesperson of my own brand
That's
as
a
myself.
great realization, by the way.
So Matt, I'll lead you on for a second because you always have some great insights about that. But why don't you say more?
We work with a lot of owners that generate maybe a majority or at least a large portion of their revenue. And the transition from an owner doing the sales to having a sales person or team is probably one of the hardest things an owner can do. Because you're right, you probably can never hire someone that's going to be as good a salesperson as you are. And you have to be able to live with that if you want to grow, to the next level.
Now, I'll agree with you partially on that, because in listening to Julie, one of the things, and you, Matt, one of the things that we've always said is that most of the time, a business owner is a better salesperson than a salesperson. Most of the time.
Most of the time.
Right. So now here Julie talks about the fact that she actually has learned to really enjoy sales and she's really good at it. So maybe she really shouldn't be hiring a salesperson. Maybe you should be hiring an operations person, an administrative person who will give you more time to sell. Because after all, you are, on some levels, a solopreneur. And so the next question we probably want to know is, how big do you want to grow? And you grow in stages. So maybe in your thinking about what type of person you should hire, maybe it should be somebody that will make you more efficient and
Right.
give you more time to sell, and then have somebody else to do the grunt work and to do all of the stuff that as a solopreneur you wind up always doing.
So that sort of leads me, thank you, Michael, into the next point, which is figuring out what do you do best, and what is it that you do is most valuable to the company, and then delegate the things that aren't. And that's really the process of trying to figure out what you should be doing and what you should outsource or hire people to do.
Let me ask a question. Generally speaking, do you guys think it's better for something like social media, for something like online marketing? There's two ways you can go, right? You can hire a person to come be your social media person, or you can hire a firm to handle your social media.
Correct.
How do you guys feel about the pros and cons of those two roads for a smaller company?
Wait, there are 3 roads.
You can do it yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
3 roads.
But assuming that's something you've decided you need to outsource, do you generally think it's better to have a person who's your person, or to bring in the muscle of a company of people?
Well, it somewhat depends on your budget. If you're working with a company, they're going to more than likely be charging more than an individual contractor is going to charge. So I think in Julie's case, it is she needs to find someone that can repeat or understand the brand and get that image out there on a daily basis to extend the brand and to keep the voice of the brand the same that she wants it to be.
Julie, it gets down to this question of worth and value, how you measure value. How much do you want to grow? Because that's the key to all this, isn't it? Sort of what
Yeah.
your goals are.
Well, actually, I can remind you when we first met, and just so that everybody knows, Julie has been working with Voice of Reason Consulting for
5 years?
Well, actually, most of the 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the questions we actually, I asked you way back in the beginning was, you were working as well as being, right? And your original intent was to stop working for the man
Oh,
or
yeah.
the woman and be able to do this and totally make enough revenue so that you could just leave the other work and this would be it. So now it's all these years later and you are successful. There's no question about it.
How long did that take? When were you able to quit your day job?
Say it.
I still have it.
There you go. There you go. So that's really now that we talk about, and we go back to David's question, which I'm really glad you did that. So a business poised for growth and a lifestyle business,
Yeah.
and the in between.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I have like a dollar amount in mind that I want to achieve. It's more of just, I'd like to see the brand be successful and get bigger. I'd like to hire a team so I really can focus on more designing and sales and do this full time.
Well, I have a question because, when you first start out, you have a certain goal in your mind or dream. And then as time goes on, generally it changes
Oh, of
for a
course.
variety of reasons. So has your goal or vision changed for what you want for your studio?
I think it has shifted a little bit, but I think ultimately that kind of always was my dream and my goal and my passion to achieve. And I think I'm getting there. And I think it's maybe just, had a different path than maybe I originally thought. But, I'm happy in the way that I've grown and learned in this journey.
Great. So if you could wave a magic wand, I like using that. So you would be doing your studio business full time.
Absolutely.
Terrific.
I just now am a lot more knowledgeable about everything that it takes about a business, all the expenses, all of the different aspects of it that you need to know. And so I'm really educating myself and learning and figuring out a way to take the big plunge.
So
Great.
actually, I'm going to suggest a book that's worth reading. It's called The E-Myth Revisited, and it's by Michael Gerber. And in it, he talks about all of the personality and all of the qualities that an entrepreneur has to have. And it's great insight because it talks about having to be a visionary, having to be the technical person, having to be the manager, having to be the doer. And it really is fascinating because with that insight, you can begin to look at when you want to build a company, who are the types of people that you need. You're the visionary, for argument's sake. You're the salesperson, but you're not necessarily the manager or the technocrat. Or you are the manager, but not necessarily the visionary. It's really very helpful. So I think on your quest to get to the next level, you might want to read that book.
All right, I'll check it out.
We'll be right back after these messages. If you're enjoying this show, you might also like some of the other podcasts on Racecar Radio. For instance, try London's New York. Your guide, Dan London, takes you on a deep and opinionated tour through some parts of New York City that are a little to the side of the usual tourist trail. And along the way, teaches you something about the extraordinary, rich, and diverse history of one of the greatest cities in the world. I guarantee you that it's a view of New York City that you've never had before. Listen and subscribe now to London's New York at racecarradio.com. Racecar Radio is proud to support the work of Aya Worldwide, a tenacious and dedicated organization working to address the root causes of poverty in West Africa. Because they believe that who a person is and where they come from should not solely determine what they are able to achieve. To learn about their work and how you can support it, please visit ayaworldwide.org. And now, back to Mind Your Own Business with Mike and Matt. So, that was such an interesting conversation with Julie. And I'm wondering maybe the next step. So once you've decided, okay, I need to hire somebody, you have a concept at least of, this is the person I should hire. This is the aspect I should be, or the 2 or 3 aspects I should be outsourcing. How do you find people?
Well, I have I don't know if it's a pet peeve, but I have a philosophy, I guess. And that is one of the owner's most important jobs is finding the right people for the company, and the owner has to be recruiting all the time. If you wait till you need someone, it's too late because all the good people have jobs. And if you haven't identified someone that who has a job and that is good at what skill set you need, you're going to get someone who doesn't have a job. And there's a reason. They don't have a job.
Well, I don't know if I quite agree with that. But here's the part that I agree with.
So you're a big game poacher, is what you're.
I'm a big game poacher. I'll tell you, 2 of our best employees at Netland, one took me 4 years and one took me 5 years to hire.
Well, okay. I can agree with Matt on the fact of that you do want to hire people who have been successful in other jobs. So you want to, and you should always be looking for people, always. And he's right about that. However, I think there are lots of people out there who don't have a job because they're either first starting in the marketplace or they voluntarily left a job for a variety of good reasons. And since I've always been one of those people too, I can't say that it's an ironclad rule that you always need to hire somebody who's already currently in a job. It's a good thing to do, but it also is an ironclad rule or generalization that I don't totally agree with. But I will totally agree with you always do need to be hiring. The other part, though, is that you also need to know what business culture you want. And so, when you hire people, you want people to basically fit into that culture. Now, I am not saying when I say that you want everybody to be the same in your company. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you have a culture which basically says this is the environment that you want to cultivate for a significant portion of your waking time, right? I mean, if you work 8 hours a day, that's 1/3 of a day. And usually if you work 10 or 12, that's more than 1/3 of a day. And then you multiply that by the 5 days a week or the 6 days a week, and you find you're spending so much more time working than not working. Well, wouldn't you want then to have people who you work with be a reflection of what you're aspiring to?
That's interesting. And how would you What are some of the aspects of a business culture? What does that mean? Like, how would you define for yourself the culture of your company?
Well, I go back to Netland and what I wanted, why I was an accidental business owner. The Netland was a company that Matt and I co-founded together. That was 1985. And we grew that company significantly over the period of 15 years. But up until that point, I had done a lot of other things and a lot of other jobs. And when I had this opportunity to start a business with Matt, I knew the things that I wanted to be in that environment. So for instance, up until then, when I worked for other people, I'd have an idea and somebody would tap me on the back and say, "Hey, that's a great idea, Mike, but that's not the way we do things around here." So I wanted to build a culture that was not going to happen. I wanted to build a culture where you couldn't see the end of the horizon, that it was so far out there that you had to constantly reach for it. It wasn't narrow. I also wanted to be able to a place where to make as much money as I could possibly make, and I wanted everybody else to be able to do that. So when people said, "I want to make X," and I knew I couldn't afford to pay them X, I could only afford to pay them Y, I wanted to work with them to find a way that they could go to that X, that they could make it. So those were the things that I wanted to inculcate in the business environment that I was basically putting myself on the line for.
Ambition sounds like what you were looking for.
At that time. Now, Matt had other reasons.
Yeah, I wanted to make money.
Well, who can blame you? But then,
And I wanted to make as much money as possible. And then I wanted to sell a business.
did you make as much money as possible?
I made a lot more money than I ever thought was possible. So I
That's-
guess, yeah.
So let's say you're in an interview. You have 15 minutes, a half an hour with someone. How do you tease out whether this is somebody that you want around? How do you get? You're talking about kind of deep things. You want somebody who's, let's say, you want somebody who's creative, who's ambitious, who you share. You feel like you could spend time with. How do you find that person?
To go with Michael's, one, you should have a good job description, number one. And it's very helpful to have a process, not that I necessarily follow it all the time, because, you interview someone, you have a colleague interview someone, "Gee, I really like that person." Or, I didn't really like that person. Well, what does that mean, right? But you really should have a process, because if you have a process and you have some type of metric, I'm not going to say necessarily testing, but some type of metric, and I hire someone that's really good, I look at that metric and I say, "Gee, I'd like to get someone similar to this metric." And it takes a lot of the emotion out of it. Not that at the end of the day, if you don't like the person, you're not going to hire him anyway, right? But you need more than 3 or 4 people liking the person to whether they're going to be a good fit.
So I agree with Matt. You got to have a process. Now, there are things are happening out in the world. One is there is this concept of called assessments, and we've been working with that with our clients, where you develop a profile of skill set, thinking style, behavior style, et cetera. And you have a job description, and then you have a profile of different qualities that fit, thinking style and behavior style. And then if you have a candidate that you've interviewed and any number of people in the organization on a gut level believe that this is a candidate that would be worth hiring, you then do these assessments. For salespeople, it's a sales assessment. For support people, administrative people, they're all types. And that assessment basically kind of tells you where they fit within the profile that you've designed for the job. And by the way, an outlier, either negative or positive, is not a bad thing. It just basically tells you more about that individual, and if you do hire them, where are the areas that you should be working with them to basically make them a more integral part of your company. So those are assessments, and they've been very effective. We've used them with our clients.
Is that something you can go buy or
Yes.
Yes, there are
find
people.
online?
There are people who do that. We work with one individual in particular, and she that's what she does, and she does a great deal of support interpreting those assessments because it's not so easy on the top level to interpret it. Now, the other thing that you look for when you're talking with people is if you indeed have a business culture. So I have a client who has identified 11 or 12 different aspects that are part of their culture. One of that is a can-do attitude. Another is that there is no problem too big that we can't solve. These are qualities that the president, the founder and owner of the company, has basically said, this is some that I'm looking for in people. So when you're having that interview, you're talking about those things that you're aspiring to and seeing if that individual. Then, of course, the last thing comes down to the question that Matt always asks in terms of hiring when he does reference checks. Now, reference checks are critical, and you do have to do a reference check not only on the positives, but also on the negatives. In other words, if somebody says, well, I didn't get along with my boss, you want to talk to that boss. You want to find out why they didn't get along. And that leads to Matt's famous question.
In most cases, these days it's hard to get information, particularly if it's a larger company, other than when they were hired and when they left. But I always like to ask, would you hire this person again? Because that's really the telling. If the answer is not yes, then I don't think I would recommend hiring them.
Now, I would.
Couldn't that answer be no and it still be someone you want to hire? I mean,
Yes,
you don't share a brain with that.
It is possible.
No, this is exactly.
The person you're talking to might be an idiot.
But this is the Mike and Matt show. So the fact about the Mike and Matt is black and white when it comes to this kind of thing. Michael is gray when it comes to this kind of thing because the belief that, well, would you hire them again? And the answer said no. That doesn't tell you what the dynamics were between those two people. It's a great indicator, but it isn't necessarily the whole story. So for me,
Maybe
why
would you hire them again?
I would want to probe the why. But quite frankly, different strokes, different folks. It's always worked for Matt, and it's always worked for me to have the gray part of it.
I think maybe the ultimate answer here is Mike, is that you really should just mind your own business.
Say that again?
I think you should probably just mind your own business.
Dave, you want me to mind your own business? I have to say that to Matt. Matt, will you please mind your own business?
Dave and Michael, please mind your own business.
Thanks for listening to Mind Your Own Business with Mike and Matt. Tune into upcoming episodes for conversations about the finances of taking on new staff, the power of abundant thinking, and much more. Never miss an episode by subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and many of your other favorite podcasting apps. Find those links at racecarradio.com/mindyourownbusiness. You can also follow us on social media at MYOB Podcast on Facebook and Twitter. Our guest today was Julie Van Such of J Van Such Studio. www.jvansuch.com. The stars of the show are Mike Gansel and Matt Plosiak of Voice of Reason Consulting. www.voiceofreasonconsulting.com. I'm David Hoffman, and I produced and recorded the show. It was edited by Austin Colon. Mind Your Own Business with Mike and Matt is a production of Racecar Radio. www.racecarradio.com.